One of the things about history that I enjoy the most is there are always new things to learn. Just when you think you've heard every story about something that you're interested in, there are other stories that come to life, or you visit a new place and you see something from a different perspective. You watch a documentary on television from an era gone by. And one of the things that's happened, and I'm recording this in September of 2020, is over the summer, there have been a number of riots in response to um, the uh, murder of a man named George Floyd in Minneapolis by police officers. Um, there have been controversies surrounding police actions towards African Americans in our own area. Breonna Taylor, her case has been one that's caused a lot of strife in Louisville and around the country. And as these things happened, um, one of the stories that got told was one that I'd never heard before. People talking about what needed to be taught in schools, and you saw a lot of articles emerging about the Tulsa race massacre. And we're closing in next spring's early summer will be the 100th anniversary of this. And I got to confess, as I heard about it, it was something that I'd never learned about. I took a couple of African American history classes at IU, no mention. Obviously, try and do a good job of reading and just continually adding to my knowledge of American history in my role teaching this class, and just had never heard about it. And think though that it brings to a close this era of discrimination that we're talking about quite well. And so we'll look at the events of that day and how it really sets up, brings to an end, kind of this first period of discrimination and a civil rights movement, and then sets up the movement that we'll talk about second semester when we do the modern civil rights movement. Saw this quote from a historian who'd written a book. He's from Tulsa. He'd written a book about the race riots. His history is not past, it's present. We're living the legacy of the things that have happened in the past. There's a deep and abiding connection that we can't avoid. And that's been one of the themes, I think, that has come out this summer, this season in the life of our nation, is just this idea that we're paying for things, bad decisions that were being made before, but we're seeing the hangover of those decisions and how it's influenced our society, and the strife that it's created. And so hopefully as we've looked at these past events, you can see how these decisions have shaped parts of our culture today, but hopefully you've seen ways that they don't have to influence those actions in quite the same way. Basically, I saw this one in an article on theringer.com. A local poet in Tulsa had referred to the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as Wakanda before Wakanda. Now, if you're not familiar with the Black Panther movie, you need to go see the Black Panther movie because it's really cool. But Black Panther is a Marvel superhero who lives in kind of this futuristic society, utopia in Africa called Wakanda, and it's technologically ahead of its time, it's financially ahead of its time, and Wakanda is looked at as being a haven for not only this Wakandan people in Africa, but eventually by the end of the film for African American people of color all over the world. And so to call it that, this is just an extremely prosperous district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You can see some pictures there on the screen of that. And let's dig into what happened. I found it interesting as I started to read. Basically, people come to Tulsa, and people, African Americans come to Tulsa as part of Indian removal. That's interesting. Uh, what ended up happening is that freed black men and women often joined these tribes, and as they moved out to Oklahoma, in a lot of instances, they were given land in the same way that some of those folks were in Oklahoma. Um, but after the Civil War, as you start to see Jim Crow laws develop in the South, Tulsa kind of forces segregation on the population. So you had one part of Tulsa that was the black part of Tulsa, and one part that was the white part of Tulsa. And as those things got separated, black businesses started to spring up. I think the first one they said was a grocery store to meet the needs of that community, and just kind of an explosion of black-owned businesses, movie theaters, restaurants, clothing stores, food stores, things like that, that spring up into just this extremely prosperous part of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was looked at as being kind of a shining example of what these communities could start to look like around the world. So up until 1921, this is an extremely prosperous area of Tulsa. What happens is there is, as you see in many of these instances, there is an accusation of assault from a teenage white woman against a teenage black boy. She was an elevator operator. He was a shoe shine boy, and he gets kind of muddied in history. But somehow, when the elevator doors open, they got to the floor. She's screaming that he's attacked her. He's running for what he feels like is his life. He's eventually arrested. She'll recant her statement eventually that he assaulted her, but in the beginning she says that he assaulted her, ripped her clothes, and so when he's arrested, that was we talked about this, kind of the big red flag at this time, is that if you were a black man, you didn't want to in any way be associated with doing something inappropriate with a white woman, and so as they come in. As he's brought into jail, very quickly there is a crowd of white citizens of Tulsa that are demanding he be handed over to them, probably to be lynched. There is a group of black citizens of Tulsa that come in to stop the lynching. They kind of figured this may be something that happened, and so they come down, and those two groups will have a clash. A shot's fired by somebody. By the time that initial conflict is over, 12 people are dead, and some of these white citizens will descend onto Greenwood and start burning businesses that are there. The local law enforcement, to keep order, deputized hundreds of white citizens, giving them guns and ammunition. Probably not the best decision that was made, and chaos eventually just takes over Tulsa. All that night and the next day, by the time the smoke clears, Black Wall Street has been burned to the ground. Black citizens who were not injured or killed have been rounded up and taken to a convention hall in Tulsa, where eventually they'll have to figure out how they're going to be able to get out of there and move on. Got an image of the aftermath. So you think about those pictures we saw at the beginning, and then what happened at the end. It's just amazing to see the damage that was done in this instance. 1,200 homes and businesses are destroyed by the time the smoke clears. 9,000 people are homeless. Saw the estimates. The official death count was about 30 people. The low end that I saw was 100. The high end was 300 deaths, and most people today land somewhere in between those two figures. Did over $1 million worth of damage, and the insurance company wouldn't reimburse these businesses because they said it was part of or been caused by a riot and so that wasn't under the insurance coverage. Eventually, they will rebuild by 1925. Uh, Most of the businesses have been built back, and the community's thriving again. Um, but really, it's an example of a clash in a place really you don't think about there being a clash, right? Tulsa, Oklahoma is not Selma, Alabama, or a place like that. But again, just almost a blowback to you. You've got this prosperity, but then you've got a reason to go in, as some of these white citizens concerned about, maybe the black citizens with too much prosperity and power, and using this as an excuse to destroy those businesses, those people that died. Of course, not getting any justice for their deaths, and like I said, just kind of almost a forgotten part of history up until now. I'm sure as the 100th anniversary approaches, you may see a little bit more. I'm going to link a great article that I found from the Ringer on the Canvas page, and I've also got a video that's uploaded to the playlist. There's also talk that Hollywood may do a movie that's based on this. It's got some pretty powerful backers. Now that the story's come out, folks like Oprah who are talking about turning this into a movie. So that would be interesting to see. Really, what we see by the end of the 1920s is this is where society is set. You can be prosperous, but if you're black in this country, you can be prosperous, but within limits. You needed very much to quote unquote know your place, and there's always the fear that something like this could happen and destroy everything that you built. What we're going to see is that really, as we transition into World War I and World War II, and you've got African American soldiers serving there, fighting, especially in World War II, and coming back and saying, "Wait a minute, I'm fighting against this same type of oppression overseas, but I come home and I'm treated like this." That really, in the 50s and 60s, we see a lot of momentum gained in what we're going to call the modern civil rights movement. Second semesters, we see that. But like I said, just wanted to add this in. I think it's a nice little bookend to what we're talking about, and hopefully an event that you go out and seek to learn a little more about yourself.